body and spirit. This podcast is dedicated to individuals who are on a quest to uncover their truth, understanding their genetic and spiritual DNA, and learning how to harness this knowledge to achieve optimal health. But this isn't just another health podcast. Natural Podcast is here to ignite a spark of hope within you, reminding you of your innate potential for greatness. You are pure love, capable of living life to your fullest potential. Are you ready to embark on a transformation journey to explore and achieve optimal health? In today's episode, we talk to Susan Marrufo. Susan is the founder of Samarasa Center and is known for teaching the widely popular signature course called Yoga, Sex and Death. The course is all about the relationship between yoga, sacred sexuality and death. With over 20 people on her team, thousands of people have gone through her in-person and online teachings. She holds a 500-hour yoga certification. In 2018, she was miserable and drinking herself to death despite having a happily marriage, a good job in advertising, and a lovely home. To get away from her misery, Susan decided to travel the world to discover herself. She ended up in Asia, where she spent several years in Thailand and India, living in spiritual communities as a yoga and meditation student and teacher. Some interesting facts about Susan is that she left the States in 2008. She absolutely loves traveling, and she doesn't have a home because she travels all around the world. Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast, Susan.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm super happy to be here.
Wow, what a little up and down we've had to get this podcast rolling. I mean, if everyone just knew what
Yes,
we had to go through.
we've had our share of challenges to overcome, but we have persevered.
We
Here we
have
are.
indeed. We are. And it's
We,
recording, which is absolutely amazing. We're so blessed. I think the lesson here was to just keep at it, right? And just
yeah,
trial.
that's it. You just keep going. You just got to keep going. Keep your eye on the prize.
Yeah, the universe was
Consistency.
testing us. It was testing us. Take
Yeah,
deep breaths. The more deep breaths you take, the more I'll work with you.
yeah. We had to burn through that karma, which is and and now here we are.
I love that. I love
So
that. So
I'm
look, you've
happy to be
traveled the
here.
world, Susan. Tell me a little bit more about this. Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? Like, people travel the world and they go, once a year, they take a 4-week holiday. But what does that look like traveling the world like for you?
You know what word just came to my mouth? You can edit this, right?
Depends if I
It's
want
like,
to. That's the question.
right. The word that comes to my mind is parasites. I'm just,
Okay, great.
that's what it looks like for me right now because I'm just doing a cleanse and
Yeah.
it's tough on the physical body sometimes. I just was in India for about 4 months. I took some people down. I'm not really selling this lifestyle as if I lead with parasites, right? But but really, it is an amazing, this life is just, I feel very blessed. I just took a group of people on a tour of some sacred sites down in South India, and then I also taught an advanced level teacher training there in India as well. So I was down in India for almost 4 months, and then I stopped in the States. Before that, I was in Thailand, and then I stopped in the States and came. Now I'm here at Lake Atitlan, Guatemala. So it just looks like it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of adventure. It's a lot of surrendering. It's a constant practice in just letting go and realizing I am not in control of this show. And um and I love that. It feels so there's a spontaneity that it brings to my life that I crave. So I don't have like a conventional home, like a physical home. I don't rent or I haven't bought a home. I This house that I'm staying in Guatemala, I rent for a few months every year, and I've done that for the past 3 years. So it's kind of
There's some
the
consistency
closest.
there. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. That is consistency for me, and
Yeah.
um, so it's a lifestyle I love. I left the States in 2008, and then in 2015 16, I moved back to the States. After all of that time, I moved back to open up a yoga and meditation center in Los Angeles. So I was in LA. We opened in 2017 and then we closed in 2020 because of COVID. So
Yes.
I was actually in one place for almost 4 years, and that was the longest I had been in a place. Wow, since 2008. And
Yeah.
it was challenging for me, but when we closed, I thought, well, all right, it's time I can get back out on the road now. I'm going to take the show on the road. So most of my work is online, except for when I do in-person retreats or in-person trainings. And it's awesome,
Yeah.
Mihaela. It's just
Yeah, I
awesome.
can imagine. It sounds absolutely amazing. So, what got you into yoga? Like, what happened in 2008? Was that kind of like the breaking point for you where you're like, I'm going to do yoga? Did you do yoga before that? Like, what really got you into it?
I was married, and at the time, I met my ex-husband when I was 21, and he's the one that took me to my first yoga class. He was a rugby player,
Mm,
and they all did yoga. And
wow.
so yeah, they did yoga to avoid getting injured. And it was
I
great
love
to
that.
keep
Oh my, I
their
love that.
bodies supple. And it was amazing to watch these guys, right? Because, most of them were these just huge dudes,
Yeah.
like trying to figure out how to move their bodies. And I went with him for the first time and I just never looked back. It just became a thing that I took to, like a fish to water. And I had just been practicing ever since I was 21. Now, at that time, all throughout my 20s, I was drinking a lot. Like, as you mentioned in your intro, um, I was drinking a lot. And so the effects of the practice were kind of counterbalanced by my drinking. With a consistent practice of yoga without drinking alcohol, it's like it can really be buoyed by the effects and by the practice. It can really just help. It has helped me to feel very expansive and uplifted. But at that time, because I was drinking so much, it just kind of it kept me at least sane. It kept me
Mm,
alive because I was just drinking so much that I really didn't learn about the true benefits of yoga until I quit drinking. But I'm so grateful that I had it because I was practicing a lot back then. I was also working a lot and partying a lot. So um, then yeah, I just had to come to terms with myself, I think is the reason that I left this. I just left. It was, you know, it's one of those stories where I got everything that I thought I should have to be happy, and I just was not happy. And I was pointing the finger outward. Um, I was young and I didn't really have a lot of self-awareness tools. And so I was just in the blame game and I was angry and
mm,
I thought it was because of everybody else. I thought it was because of my husband, because of my job, because of my family, because of all of these things. And I didn't have the clue as to, like, hey, woman, why don't you look at the common denominator here, right? Like, look inside. And so
yeah.
I realized, like, okay, I need to do some work here. And for whatever reason, I don't advocate this. I don't say everyone has to do it like this. But for whatever reason, for me, I had to remove myself from the life that I had created. I couldn't do it within that context. And so I took myself out of the context and I quit my job and I told my husband, I need to just be on my own and see what's in here and be on this whole journey. And he understood. He's a pretty amazing human being. He understood and so I left and I moved to Europe. I moved to Spain. And that was it. That was it. I did not come back. I mean, I would come back to visit, Um, but I didn't come back to live until we opened up the center. Now, throughout this entire time, so that first year that I left, my practice is really what grounded me. And I called that
Mm.
year like just a year of awakening. It was just so magical. I was having these experiences. Let me back up by saying I didn't have a yoga community, even though I had been practicing yoga since I was 21 and I left the States when I was 29. All of those years in my 20s, I didn't have like a yoga community. I was just um, a brand manager in advertising. I would work and then I'd go drink and party. And um, no one in my family, I didn't have like these models of yogis in my life. And
Mm.
so I was just kind of in my own trip, just figuring out myself. And when I left and moved to Spain, it was just like I felt I could breathe for the first time in my life. I felt my body relax for the first time in my life. And I was getting really deep into my practice at that time. And it was an individual practice, it wasn't in a studio. And I think that was really important that it was just me with me and not comparing myself to anybody else, which is all a metaphor, right? Because whatever you
Yes.
do on the mat, however, whatever stories are running through your mind on the mat are the same stories you carry with you throughout life. They're the same thoughts you have off the mat. So I wasn't, it was just me and I didn't have any distractions. And I would just get on my mat every day and I wasn't drinking at the time. And I just started to feel because I wasn't numbing with all the alcohol and the drinking. And
You
with
finally
my
started to
practice, it just,
feel the feelings and
yes,
everything kind of just came up because, like you said at the start, you were pointing outwards, not inside, and you were using, in this instance, alcohol as a suppressant. But that all led to you, which in a way is kind of like, is it good, is it bad? It's neither, because that all led to you to actually self discover, right?
absolutely. I mean, that's something that I say a lot, which is it's impossible to judge somebody else's path, you know? We can
Mm,
judge it as like, oh, and we do. It's a human thing. They're on the wrong path. It's like does that even exist? I don't know. Because I imagine somebody would have said that about me when I'm passed out somewhere, like she's not on the right path. And
yeah.
I feel that absolutely it has brought me here. And so it's just an unfolding. Wherever you are in your story is where you are, and it continues until it
Mm.
doesn't.
It's not the wrong path or the right path or whatever. It just is exactly what it's supposed to be in that moment for that individual. I love that.
Which is a very tantric teaching. I
Mm.
teach tantra, and that's a very tantric teaching. There's not one thing that's more sacred or holier than another. It's all God, if you want to use that word. It's all sacred. It's all the divine. There's nothing left out. So I really believe that. And we get into these ideas of these spiritual paths or these like holy trips. And really, yeah, just as you said, it's all just an unfolding, a happening, and there's no right or wrong. At least that's how I view it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Um, I'm excited to jump into today's topic after hearing your story, which is extraordinary, and thanks for sharing that with us. Someone might be listening and being like, "Oh, you know what? I'm just gonna get up, leave, and explore and find out who I am." Not that you need to do that, but it might
Right.
motivate some individuals too, or even just to get on the mat after this episode, or just, point that finger inwards, not outwards. Take
Yeah,
accountability. Figure out, hey, how do I play in this story? Hey, I'm the main
that's
actor
it.
in this play. What do I do? But today we're going to be talking about the balancing act, the journey to heal your inner masculine and feminine. And I think this has been a major topic for the last few years. we've had extremes of both, and individuals have had their says like, this is what masculinity is, this is what feminine is,
Right.
and there's a mixture of it all. I want to know your overview. Like, what does it mean when you say your inner masculine and feminine? What does that look like for Susan?
Well, for me, I see most things through a yogic lens. So I come at it from a yogic perspective first, which is a balancing of the two poles of the being. Like everything in the universe has a positive charge and a negative charge, a plus and a minus, the yin and the yang. And so I prefer these days to use these words like yin and yang because it seems to really get people out of this head trip of masculine, feminine, and everything that they associate with the masculine and everything that they associate with the feminine. It can be a little bit suffocating and hard for people to get out of their narratives around these words and the meanings that they ascribe to them. So let's just say yin and yang, in yoga, and in yoga, it's the sun and the moon. Hatha yoga is ha is sun and tha is moon. And so what we do is actually balance the physical body, the right and the left sides of the body. We bring them into balance with physical postures, but also with the energy. So there's a yin and a yang energy. And energetically, um, so let me back up by saying that the yin is associated with the feminine and the yang is associated with the masculine, and that the masculine and that solar energy of the sun, we were talking about the sun and the moon, that is what we could associate with the masculine, and the yin is the feminine and that lunar energy. It's very receptive and sensitive and tuned in and listening. And we talked about surrender earlier. That's a very yin quality. And the yang is very fiery and active and hot. I'd like to talk about it in terms of qualities. Um, in classical tantra, that is typically how they talked about these two universal forces of the being, these two universal principles, the yin and the yang, and they talked about them with qualities. And it's a newer age thing to ascribe personality traits or characteristics to them. And it's not, I don't think it's wrong. It's very helpful, actually. It's a framework that I use in my teaching, but I just want to make that distinction. Um, so for me, the healing of the inner masculine and the feminine is what I call the first lovemaking. It's it's the first union. It happens here at the level of the heart, but because I see things through a yogic lens, there's it means it's a multi-dimensional union, meaning there's union at the physical level of those two principles, that right and the left sides of the being, and there's union on an energetic level, so those qualities that we're talking about. Then there's union on an emotional level, on a mental level, and a spiritual level. So all of these things, when another word for union would be integration.
Mm.
When everything gets integrated, then there is wholeness. And that means bringing these two things, these two forces inside of each individual being, bringing those together to be integrated for wholeness. Okay, so now we're there. Now the next part is, well, what is integration? What does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, I was gonna say, how does that happen? Because that sounds amazing, and I love that you said that that's the first union. Uh, I love that is within yourself.
That's it. And the tendency is to look for it out there. It's a very human thing. It's a very human. it's kind of the job of the human being to just look for it out there. We could call it ego. The mind is just trained and conditioned. It's been going on for generations to look for it out there. And what I do in my work is we just bring it back here. We bring it back here. We bring it back here. And the mind does its job, and the mind innocently goes and looks for it out there, whether it's in a person. Usually, when we talk about masculine and feminine, we're talking about relationships, we're talking about another person, and we usually look for it in a relationship or out there. And inevitably, our wounds and our traumas and our conditionings come up. And in the relating, which is one of the reasons relationships are so important. And I just am a big believer in the path of relating. But what I do in my work, there's just practices for the different levels. There's practices for the physical body to find that union in the physical body, whether it's hatha yoga or somatic movement. But also I work with somatics in terms of an emotional body and working with the nervous system. And also on the emotional level, I do a lot of shadow work. I don't know if you're familiar with shadow work, but it's basically we go into the story, the personal story of our history, what's happened to us, Susan's story, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, how I grew up, the wounds, we look at the traumas, all of the things, I was talking about. I drank a lot and I was numbing. Well,
Mm.
the only way to heal it is to feel it. I imagine you've heard that before, and that was true in my experience. So once I quit drinking, wow, all of this stuff that I had been pushing down, suppressing, and repressing just came up to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. So we do very specific exercises and shadow work that are it's I've been doing this for a long time. Been in my own work for many years, for over 20 years now, and there's just specific exercises and ways to get to the things that the ego usually wants to protect. And so now I have the ways to get through on an emotional level and on an energetic level. We do a lot of tantric practices that work with energy to bring this yin, this lunar, and the solar energies together. And then the mental level is tied very closely to the emotional body, but we're talking a lot about our stories, and specifically through the work of Byron Katie. We do a lot of self-inquiry through the work of Byron Katie. And then ultimately it's to find out who we are without the story. Like who's in there? Who's in there? So the retreat I teach is called Yoga, Sex, and Death. And sexuality for me is a place that we explore through the emotional and the mental, and exploring our beliefs and our blockages around our sexuality, so that we can find out what's underneath and what's really true for us. Everyone has a truth that cannot be found outside of them. And it's just the most intimate you can get. To me, that is intimacy. So really, it's about meeting yourself honestly, and just holding a mirror up to yourself and looking at where are the distortions of the masculine inside of you. What did you learn? Like, how did you see your father behave? Was he around? Was he not around? How did he talk about women to you? Did he have other women friends? How did he talk to your mother when you were around? When she was around? And then how did he talk to her or about her when she wasn't around? And the flip side for the mother, we just look at these things. Like, what did we internalize? What are our beliefs? How did
Mm.
they come about? How did they get there? And then we question all of it. But the point is really to look at, where am I in terms of my inner feminine and my inner masculine? Where am I, and where are the distortions inside of me? Like, I can give you an example. I mean, I had a
Yes, please.
very tumultuous relationship with my mother growing up.
Mm.
And this, unbeknownst to me, because I wasn't involved in any of this work, affected all of my relationships with women. It just projected, because she's the first mother connection. She's the first feminine connection I had as a child. So it informs all of my relationships with other women. I just take that lens on, that story on, and then project it out into the world. And the same with my father. I was the daddy's girl. And so I made this story of, well, women are competitive and jealous, and men are much safer. And so I just went through the world with that story and that lens. And so obviously that's all I saw. That's what I
That's so
saw.
interesting.
And until I started to do this work, I really and did a lot of inner healing of the feminine inside of me, my own attitudes and beliefs around the feminine, which meant really looking at my relationship with my mom. Everything changed.
Mm.
Everything changed. And I was able to know what it means to really trust women and have strong female connections and heal, just let go of all of this armor and pain that I was holding in my body, so that I could open up and have my heart open to have those very strong feminine connections. And, you know, that is also an inner distortion of the masculine that I carried around, thinking that men are safer. Men are safer, women are manipulative, all of it. And so it's been eye-opening work for me. And to be able
100%.
to share it with others, and how these unconscious beliefs are affecting your relationships, with your
Mm.
partner, but also with your friends, with loved ones, with people you just meet on the street. It's always there because
100%.
it's that lens that we wear.
So
So it
with
changes everything. And
so with the feminine,
if
with you said with your mother,
yes,
so
yes.
and that was the first female relationship that you built. So what about individuals that didn't have or didn't grow up with a mother or didn't grow up with a father or didn't have those siblings? I guess it'll be the relationships or who their carer was and what. But what if is it has to do does it has to do with the physical male female, or does it have to do with those individuals' balance of masculine and feminine?
Well, typically, in the family structures, there's somebody that plays the polarities, plays
Yeah.
the pole. It doesn't have to be, if somebody, I work with a lot of people that grew up without mother or father, but there was a caregiver that
Yeah.
played one of the roles for them, and maybe it was somebody that had like single mothers or single fathers, where, single mothers, the father is not around. And so the mother is, and she can be tasked with, I've got to be all of these things now. I've got to be the mother and the father, and which is, possible, because we all have, I think it's super important. And I'm so glad you asked that question, because it's an important point for me to mention that, like, well, I think maybe I have, but that we all have both.
Mm.
So the feminine is not relegated to female bodies, And the masculine is not just for men. It's like there are women that feel much more identified with the masculine than they do with the feminine, and that's where they rest and that's where they like to be, just in day-to-day life or as their sexual essence. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you are in this, um, a female body, that you have all of this feminine
Yes, a
energy.
100%.
So somebody could grow up with a single parent and feel like they have received both and have had a model for both. And that happens. It's actually pretty common. Now, in those situations, however, there was a father that was absent physically. However, usually that leaves a story, it leaves a wound, it leaves a trauma, it leaves a narrative about the father. So even though the father wasn't there, the father is here, and the father is still there. It like weighs heavy in the heart, or it's always on the mind. It's in the body. So that trauma gets carried throughout life, and there are ideas and stories formed around how men are, or we could say the masculine if the father wasn't there. So just because somebody isn't there, it doesn't mean that, even more so in a lot of cases, there's a lot of stories and
Yeah,
wounds and
the
traumas
absence
around
story
the
and
absence.
yeah, the absence story. I love that. So what does it look like? So for an individual to, I guess, be more comfortable with the inner masculine and not so comfortable with the inner feminine, what does that look like? What does that individual put forward? And then the opposite, when they're more comfortable with the inner feminine and not so comfortable with the inner masculine, what does that look like? What do they come across as?
Well, um, look like I in terms of like a physical body thing, I don't really relate it to physical characteristics, but in terms of
Oh, I mean, like, what is
I
it?
hear
So I
your
didn't mean
question like,
physical, sorry.
right, right,
I meant,
right,
like,
like how
what
does it
does that come across
manifest?
like? Yes, that's the
Right,
right question. How does it manifest? Not so
right.
physical. Yes, correct.
Yeah, so somebody who's very comfortable in the feminine is somebody like is very sensitive and very in tune, is able to attune to the feelings of others. And, but in, okay, so we can talk about the distortion and we can talk about a
Yeah,
healthy feminine.
brilliant. Yes,
Okay.
let's do that. That's amazing.
Okay, cool. So, we'll say like a healthy, balanced feminine energy is able to say yes when she means yes and to say no when she means no, to be so in tune with her own body and what her body wants and needs, and to be able to express it and say it. That's a healthy feminine, very flowy, and like the quality of water, able to adapt and loves to move and dance. Like the feminine is not seeking stillness. The feminine wants the dance to continue, wants to play, wants to move. It's like nature. I mean, Mother Earth, there's a spontaneity to it, there's a wildness to it, there's a power to the feminine. So somebody who is really rooted in that feminine power is so and this is the balanced, is so able to crush and obliterate everything in her path through the power of love and devotion. So you have that, the power and the strength, but through surrender, love, and devotion. And that is a healthy feminine. Feminine just wants connection and love and radiant. The best thing you could say to somebody who is identified in the feminine ways, like, you are radiant and you appreciate their light and you appreciate the shine. I mean, that's what the feminine loves to hear. Now, a distortion, one of the main distortions of the feminine is codependency and also manipulation. So it takes that in the attunement and the listening and distorts it into like, I need to, I'm only okay if everybody else is okay. And I take care of everybody first. And I just totally forget about me. It's like the martyr or the, the victim. And because we see that that's a manipulation, we do that a lot of times. And I have this, I can definitely find it in myself. I'm giving to get something back. I'm giving because I want in return love, approval, or appreciation. And so there's a codependency in that. It's like, I am not okay if I do not get the love, validation, and approval of other people. Therefore,
Mm.
I've got to keep myself running to just give what I don't have to give. And, and, like my mom's generation and my grandmother's generation, that was very much the feminine model, especially in my culture. It's like, you just do, you sacrifice, you take care of everybody else, and you take care of yourself last. And that's a distortion.
Mm.
That would be the distortion of the feminine. And we end up just manipulating for love. And so that manipulation keeps us from actually experiencing the truth that it's already. We already are. And so we learn just to come back here in the work that I do. And the masculine, just to look at the distortion of the masculine, you can look around well, you're in Australia. So it might be a bit different for you. I I grew up in the States and in the West in general, we call it the patriarchy. And it's a culture. It is go go go, do, bottom line at any cost. I am powerful when I have status, when I have money, and I will do whatever it takes if that means oppress, rape, push down um, the things that are soft and listening and slow and in tune. I don't, not interested. If it doesn't get me power, status, money, I'm not interested. And
Mm.
in fact, I feel very threatened by it. And so this is so ingrained in the culture that I grew up in that I internalized it myself. And so I've done a lot of work there, especially having my own business and having been in business now, being an entrepreneur, like watching these things come out of me, like just
I
I
feel
just
ya.
the
I
bottom
feel ya.
line, this distorted masculine energy that is like just
Mm.
fucking get the job done. I just
Yes.
want it done. I don't care. I don't want to listen to you. I don't want to hear about. Just get it done. And
Mm.
that is so ingrained in me, and so ingrained in me is also just money. Money is like, bottom line thinking, which does not account for the subtlety and the nuance of collaboration, of the diversity and the multiplicity of different individual human beings and what they bring and their gifts and talents. And there's so much I miss when I'm just like focused
So
and
much.
so much that's where all of life unfolds.
Yeah.
Eh, if we just can stop and slow down and listen and enjoy and get into the body and the senses. It's really a body-centered thing. The masculine tendency is to up here in the head, is to be
And cut
thinking.
it
I'm
all
gonna think
down.
my, yeah.
Everything from here down doesn't exist. I don't feel. I don't want to feel. If someone might touch their arm or their hand like that, it's nothing. It doesn't sense anything. Yeah. What does a healthy masculine look like?
Oh my gosh. I mean,
I love
nothing
your
better in the
excitement,
world.
Susan.
I just love, I mean, yeah, I love a healthy masculine. And it's not as if, I don't want to talk about it as if there's just this healthy masculine person and then a
Mm,
healthy feminine person. It's like
it's a
we
combination.
all have, we all have all of these parts inside of us. And
Yeah.
and that's what, when I said before, the integration, it's about
Mm,
integrating all of the parts of ourselves. And to be able to integrate it, we've got to see it first, to bring it to the light of awareness, which is,
yeah.
to me, that's yoga. We've got to be able to
Mm.
see it. If we run from it, if we don't own it within ourselves, we'll never own it in another person, and we won't have the intimacy and the connection that we say that we want. So we start with ourselves. So there isn't like this whole masculine man out there, that I'm holding in my mind, or this whole feminine. I mean, right on if there is. I just have been doing this work for a long time, and I see we all have a lot of different parts, and we're complicated beings. And of course, we heal, and that is a real thing. But a healthy masculine is someone who can contain the wildness and the power and energy of the feminine. So when I talk about the first lovemaking, I talk about it within here, because what we do in my work is we get into all the feeling stuff, all the stuff we've been numbing in the body and our energy and the emotions in the mind. We get into it and we learn to hold ourselves in that. We learn the tools to hold ourselves. We widen our capacity, our container to be able to hold what comes. And that's self-trust. And that's at the heart of
Mm.
everything. But so we can do that. We do that here. And that is a healthy masculine, is I am here. I am solid. I'm not going anywhere. I can hold this. I'm energetically, um, there's an expanse. There's an expanse there, but also a sturdiness. And it says, I am here. I can not only meet you, but I can support you and lift you up to to fly. And so these two things, they are like two wings, right? And it's like you can't really have one without the other if you want to fly.
And I love that that's accessible to us inside of us. We have the possibility to feel those emotions, to say yes, to say no, to be adaptable, to flow like water, like you said, to be flexible, to feel those emotions, to be wild. And then at the same time, we have the possibility to go within ourselves and go, you can feel those emotions and you can fall because I've got you. Like Mahela, you can feel those emotions, but at the same time, if you fall back, like I've got you, I've got the stability, I've got you, you're allowed to feel what you're feeling, and I can also tame you when you want to be tamed, and I can let you be free when you want to be free.
And this is it. And my whole life, I thought I was going to find that in somebody else.
Yeah, wow,
That
bam.
that fantasy, right? That fantasy. And I got into my 40s and something started happening where it was like the grieving of the fantasy. It's not
Yes.
out there. And how sad and how amazing and how that's the best news I've ever heard, when I can accept it, when I can really own it and come to terms with it and look at it instead of run away from it, but to be with it. Wow, what an amazing. gift to know and to practice. And what an amazing way to live, which is that it's here. It's here. And then when I go and I meet another in a relationship, it's it feels so free, which is what I love. It's the freedom of love. It's the freedom of love. It's not out of dependency and wounding and trauma bonds or I mean, that happens. It comes up also, but there's a lot of awareness around it, and that's the containment, that kind of clarity where all the emotion comes and let it come. And the masculine, the healthy masculine is the consciousness, the awareness that just pierces through it, sees right through it, and just remains. So, that is my practice. I practice a lot of just movement and yoga and flowing and listening and meditation and self-inquiry, but also a lot of more masculine practices like I can just be very still and
Mm.
sit for hours, meditation retreat, and just observe and just watch. And it's a marriage of the two things. It's that union.
That's so
Be in the
beautiful.
fullness of emotion, but also simultaneously seeing right through it and not believing it necessarily, you know?
Yeah. And I guess that's how we are able to have that, like you said, the first intimacy with ourselves, within ourselves,
Yes.
and heal the inner masculine, heal the inner feminine, to be the best of the both and have them within us. So then when we need, or so called need, that stability or need that freedom, it's within us. We don't have to look for it outside in a person, in a job, in kids, in partners, in friends. We don't need to look for it because we are whole within ourselves. Like that's just like another level for some people to even believe or think that I can achieve that.
I mean, really what we're talking about here, Mihaela, is self-realization. That's what I call
You're right.
self-realization. Or like we find God, or we find love, or we find whatever word works for for you all out there, anybody listening, like that's what I'm talking about. And to me, that's yoga.
Mm,
It's a way to go beyond just the daily experience of myself as this limited human being with all of her beautiful quirks and not so beautiful quirks, but also who's in there, what else is in there, what is the thing that does not change, and how do we go through and honor and respect the feminine, meaning another way to say that is the form. How do we respect the form of this body, of the emotions, of the mind, and not stop there? How do we
mm.
utilize it to help us go beyond it to the thing that does not change, which is pure consciousness and bliss without form?
Yeah,
So,
it's so well said, Susan. Absolute wow, like that's just I love it. I love it. So people that are listening, if they're kind of like, well, Susan, if you can give me one or two practical tips to balance my inner masculine or feminine, what would that kind of look like? What's the starting point?
well, I would say do some hatha yoga. I do some hatha yoga, and that's a great starting point. I would do some hatha yoga and then sit after yoga in silence, just noticing for a few minutes. People can make this very complicated, but it doesn't have to be complicated. I've got a lot of Sanskrit words I could use and throw out, but really, it's like move your body to get into the feminine. Let your body move and just let yourself feel and let your body go where it wants to go. Just tune in to listen to that. And then when you stop, sit down and get very still and just watch. Just notice whatever comes, whatever you feel. just watch it as if you were watching a movie. So you get to do both. It's like learn to be in the body and let your body move and connect with sensation, the senses, anything that can bring you back into your body. And then for masculine, um, I'd say just get real still and practice that skill of observing your emotions and mind. I mean, obviously, there's other things you can do in relationship, right? In relating to, if to another, um, the woman, or I'll use the word woman, but it's anybody who identifies with the feminine. How responsive, just to cultivate this skill of responsiveness in your own body. So tuning into what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and then expressing it with a sound or with a body movement, and not necessarily with words and direction, but just letting your body be responsive moment to moment. And this is something the masculine really responds to. The masculine responds to movement and to sounds and to senses. And so, if you're with a man, if you're a woman with a man, and he's not paying attention, or he's zoned out into his masculine place of just wanting to be dead, wanting to be totally zoned out, then you just go and you move, or you make a sound, or you start rubbing lotion on your legs right in front of him, just to express with your body. And the masculine in relating is that containment. It's like, exactly, you said it really well. Like, I'm here. I'm your anchor. And from that anchor, wow, so much can happen. But um, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I love you. And yeah.
Yeah.
So these are anecdotal, like, these are things. Obviously, um, if you're not there, you're there. You're not there. Like, I'm a big fan of not pretending. So just do your work. These are symptoms of a practice. They're symptoms. They come naturally when you stay in your practice and you do your inner work. You tend to your emotional wounds. You tend to the traumas, and because for sure it's not like men just be there for whatever, right?
Yeah.
No,
Mm, mm.
no. An integrated feminine says yes and says no when they mean it, and so does an integrated masculine.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love that you provide us with an example. Get on the mat, do some yoga, be still, do some breathing, understand that healing occurs within you, and that you have full control over it, and that you can hold yourself when you feel those emotions, and that you can feel those emotions. I love that. That's absolutely beautiful. Or they can attend one of your retreats on your website, and you've got some coming up, I believe. Is that right, Susan?
Yes, yes, yes. This work is very powerful. It's really a meeting of the self, and we do some deep work in there. So
Hmm.
I just would love to see any of you there. I have one coming up in June. It's sold out. It's here at Lake Atitlan. And then I have another one coming in November. And the retreat in June is women only, and the retreat in November is co-ed. So I typically do one women only retreat a year, and then one co-ed retreat a year. The co-ed retreats are, they're very different. And with the co-ed, I have a co-lead, a male co-lead, who guides those with me, and his name is Keith McGinnis, and he's amazing. He's great. So he'll be with me. He'll be joining me here at the lake in November for the Yoga, Sex, and Death co-ed retreat. And that's November 4th through the 11th.
Beautiful. Wow. And I can just, oh my God, I can keep this conversation going for hours. I've got so many questions. So maybe we can get you back another time. We can talk more about even maybe the sex part or the death part. We can go into that more. And yeah, wow, there's so much to talk about. But I love that today you gave us, so much interesting information about understanding our inner masculine, understanding our inner feminine, and then knowing that we can combine them together, and that we can be whole within ourselves. I think you just
Yes.
provided some hopes to some individuals who are listening. So I think that's absolutely beautiful, Susan.
Well, thank you, Mihaela. I'm just really glad to be here, and I'm appreciative of the opportunity to talk about these things with you and your listeners. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Natural Health Podcast, Susan. Content and information provided here is opinion of Mahela Raguse and is for information purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. It is not intended to provide medical advice or take the place of medical advice or any current treatment you're undertaking. Consult your own medical professionals for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the Natural Health Podcast. It is advised that you consult your doctor or healthcare professional in relation to any health concerns you may be having. Mahela Raguse does not take responsibility for any health consequences which occur from a person listening, viewing, or reading this content. Under no circumstances shall the Natural Podcast, Mahela Raguse, any guests or contributors to the Natural Podcast, or any employees, associates, or affiliates of Mahela Raguse be responsible for damages arising from the information provided on the Natural Podcast. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical conditions in either yourself or others. Please note, if you're taking prescription, do not stop your medication or start a new protocol, including but not limited to supplements, diet, lifestyle changes without consulting a doctor or healthcare professional. If you or any person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical advice. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have read or heard on the Natural Podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. Neither Mahela Raguse nor the publisher of this content takes responsibility for the possible health consequences of any person or persons reading or listening or following the information in the educational content.